How would I learn to code if I had to start over from scratch today? It's a pretty interesting question that I can ask myself, because clearly whatever I did in the past to learn to code has worked out pretty well for me. But if I were to start coding today, would I learn the same way that I did 10 years ago? Probably not. You see, the answer to this question probably changes every single year, with new trending technologies, new things that are important to learn, and of course, new resources for learning. So in this video, I'm going to tell you guys what I would do to learn to code if I had to start over from scratch today. So the first thing you have to do if you're going to learn to code is pick a programming language. And while a lot of people will give you the advice, it doesn't really matter what programming language you start with, as long as you're practicing every day and learning something, the skills will transfer to other programming languages. And while that is true, that's not the advice I would give. You see, I think it definitely does matter which programming language you choose to start with. This is because a lot of people give up when learning to code. When I first started college, I noticed the class size from Introduction to Programming to Data Structures next semester, the class size dropped by like 50%, meaning that a lot of people went into college to try and learn how to code and went for a computer science major, and then 50% of those people were like, okay, this isn't for me. So I think learning a difficult programming language at first could be really discouraging, and you might end up quitting. So when it comes to difficulty level, HTML and CSS are not technically programming languages, but I think they're one of the best introductions to coding. When you learn HTML and CSS, you're going to pick up a lot of things. It's going to be a good introduction to coding. It's going to be really engaging. You're going to be able to develop and see your code translate to a user interface in real time, right when you start learning. I think if you're not sure about programming, you're not confident in yourself, you just want to see if you like it, HTML and CSS are the best place to start. I constantly tell people that I think of these languages as a warm-up for real programming. Now, if you've looked at code before, or if you're just very confident in yourself, I think it's great if you want to jump straight into a programming language like Python or JavaScript. These would be more like medium difficulty programming languages, in my opinion. The easy part about them is they both have English-like syntax. So the code is not going to be too complicated to understand. The syntax, or the actual code you're going to be writing, is almost like English. However, when you learn these programming languages, you're still going to have to learn all of the fundamental concepts of programming, and those can be a little bit more difficult to understand at first than when you're using something like HTML and CSS, where you don't have to learn all that stuff. Python's really popular for back-end programming, data science, machine learning, and automation. It's one of the most popular languages in the world. JavaScript also being one of the most popular languages in the world, and anything web development that you're going to do throughout your career, it's probably going to involve JavaScript. So if you're thinking of later on getting more into web-related stuff like websites, web apps, and stuff like that, learn JavaScript. If you're thinking more about machine learning, data science, automation, back-end programming, Python. Now, you could also start with a whole bunch of other really difficult programming languages. For example, C or C++. Where Python and JavaScript are high-level languages and they're easy to write, C is considered a low-level programming language, and it gets into all of the intricacies of programming at a system level. Python's written on top of C, so C is really understanding the fundamentals of programming, and you're going to really get into the details of coding at a system level. So I personally wouldn't recommend starting with a difficult programming language like C unless you're really confident in your abilities or you have past programming experience. So that's really how I tell people they should start nowadays. I give general advice like, just do Python, just do JavaScript, pick one of those two and start. If you need a warm-up, do HTML and CSS. It will kind of ease you into coding. And if you think you're a genius, then sure, go learn C. Now, once you go down the path of learning a programming language, those will take you in different directions. However, the one thing that's consistent and is different from when I was learning to code is resources. There are so many resources nowadays that didn't exist when I first started learning to code. When I first started college, going to college for computer science seemed like the obvious thing to do. It seemed like it would be really difficult to self-teach yourself to code. However, nowadays, there's so many resources out there, you don't have to go to college. And companies know this too. Over the past decade, I've seen a huge shift of companies that just don't require degrees anymore. It seems like more commonly, companies don't require degrees. They're totally okay with interviewing and hiring self-taught developers. If you have the skill set, why wouldn't they hire you? There's so many resources online. If I was learning to code nowadays, I'm on YouTube 24/7, and I'm also doing interactive tutorials with things like Khan Academy and Code Academy. I find those to be some of the best learning resources around. One other thing I would definitely get into when I'm first learning how to code is open source. It took me like 2 years to get my first internship coding, and that was my first exposure to real software development in the real world. 2 years of building these random academic projects, and it totally blew my mind when I went into the real world, because software development in the real world is so different than what you learn in school and courses and YouTube. So once you learn a programming language, I would say pretty quickly it could be good to look into beginner level open source projects where real people and real engineers are contributing code to a project together. You could talk to them, contribute, and see how real software development is done. If I was learning to code from scratch today, there's also a huge no-code movement going on, so I'd look into some no-code platforms, for example. Wix Studio is a great no-code platform you could try out. Wix Studio makes building for the web really easy. One of the things that I did in college is I spent like months and months building a portfolio website, coding it from scratch. And really what I could have done is I could have went over to Wix Studio, looked through all the portfolio templates, found one that's really modern and high quality, and then I could have just put my projects on there and then focused on building side projects. I spent way too much time on my portfolio, and I don't think that's actually worth it when people are trying to get jobs, right? It's kind of a waste of time. And what you could do instead is work on developing your skills, building actual side projects. Also, if you learn to code and then you become a freelancer eventually, highly recommend Wix Studio for stuff like that. It's a really good all-in-one solution for building a project because there's so many templates for different kinds of software applications or websites you would build. It just makes the development process easier to manage, more efficient, cheaper, all of those things. It's an all-in-one solution kind of thing where you could add custom code if you really need to, and it has AI integration. So it's pretty great. Another thing I would do if I was learning to code today is I would 100% be utilizing AI. Now, I'm not talking about using Copilot to write all of my code and put blocks of code into my editor and I don't even know what's going on in certain functions and stuff like that. I think that could actually be a hindrance to the learning process. However, what I do mean is using something like ChatGPT to talk to like it's a human. If you don't understand something, you could submit some code. Hey, here's some code. Explain this to me. Explain this. I have a specific question. You can literally talk to these things like they are teachers. So that would be extremely useful nowadays, because one of the hardest things I used to have to go through is I'd either have to wait to get into class so I could just bombard my professors with, what about this? What about this? What about this? With all my dumb questions, or I'd have to go on Stack Overflow and just keep making posts and posts. But ChatGPT is so much better than all that stuff. Another thing I would definitely do if I was learning to code from scratch today is start social media immediately. I think creating content, posting your progress, it's all really beneficial and it will stack up over time. If it takes you a year to learn to code proficiently to get a job, 2 years, 3 years, you'll have this showcase of your work via social media, via portfolio, whatever. Just start putting content out there on the internet. It's gonna help you network. It's gonna help you showcase your work and your skills in the long run. And it's gonna make you a more desirable candidate. Now, the one thing I would do exactly the same as when I started learning to code like 10 years ago is practice every single day. You're not going to get good at something if you're not consistently practicing, and that is especially true with coding. Because in coding, you really need that information to stay fresh in your mind, and you want to grow that information in your brain. You want to remember what you're working on, and the only way to do that is really to code on a day-to-day basis. You know, if you code one day, you take 3 days off, and then you go back to coding, you're going to forget a lot of the stuff you were doing a few days ago. And this is just because there's so much detail involved in this stuff that you just want to do it every single day so that stuff stays fresh in your mind. So that's pretty much it for how I learned to code if I had to start from scratch today. Number one, I'm starting with JavaScript. I'm going to use resources like Code Academy or Khan Academy because they're interactive and easy to learn from. And I'll also use YouTube. And then I'm going to get into open source stuff right away so I get what real software development is like. I'm going to use a Wix Studio template to build my portfolio site instead of spending 6 months coding it. I'm going to use ChatGPT to ask questions to, unlike Stack Overflow, Mentorship, Professor. It's just ChatGPT is going to give me those answers instantly. And then last but not least, I'm going to practice every single day. So that's pretty much it. That's how I'd learn to code if I had to start from scratch today. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about what you would do differently if you were starting from scratch today. I also want to give one last piece of advice for after you start learning to code, because a lot of people go into coding and they want to get a 6-figure job within 6 months, because that used to be a reasonable thing you could expect like 3 years ago. But the job market isn't currently like that. So you shouldn't expect that you're going to start making over 100K within 6 months automatically. It's a lot more competitive out there right now. And a lot of people that are competing in the job market have the exact same skill set. So if you are trying to learn to code and get a job as quickly as you can, I would recommend learning a less common skill set that not everybody has. Meaning, instead of learning how to build a React.js web application, maybe go into something like mobile development or machine learning. That's pretty much it for this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.